Hi, I'm John F. Allen. And I'm R.J. Sullivan. And we're the Two Towers.
I had a question queued up, but I want to go back to what you said about your your teacher. And did you stay in touch with her the whole time, or did you circle around and get back in touch with her after
Um,
a
Jan and
period?
I were always friends.
Okay.
After school ended, we stayed friends because she was great, and she's just a great person. She's now an artist. She's no longer an English professor, but she's an artist and she's a great painter. And so at some point, I think around two, because we were still friends, we were talking. I'd go see her. We would, she was also an advisor and a mentor. So we would talk for for years after I left Laney and years after I left that job. We stayed friends. And so when I went back to her in 2010, she was, we were friends online. And that's how I found her again. And
Right,
I was
right.
like, Jan, I got some stuff. And she's like, so I see, because she says, I see you're still writing. I'm like, yes, I'm still writing. And I said, matter of fact, I got something I'd like you to look at. And that's how we got back to, to talking. So I sent it to her and she read it and she was like, okay, yes, you should publish this. So
That
that's
is,
how we met or we met.
yeah, yeah, that is great. I have a similar story with my high school creative writing teacher where there was no internet, there was no social media, and then I looked her up on the high school website, like I don't know, must have been 2008 maybe. And then to my surprise, she was there and she had an email address, and and that was a really neat positive thing because in their eyes you they see that they inspired you, and then you went on beyond kind of in some ways what they were capable of doing themselves. And there's a lot of validation for them and for you, and gives you a chance to go back and tell them what they meant to you. And that's something I continue. But it sounds like you took it even further by having her edit your book, which is terrific. But you came along at the end and mentioned something I wanted to ask you to go into in more detail, which is the Clifford Ingram paranormal investigator character and what looks like a shared author universe. And can you tell our audience more about that?
Um, Clifford Ingram happened originally somewhere around 2009. I was still trying to find a voice, and so I had it was the I found the voice I think I want to use. I couldn't figure out a story I wanted to tell, but then I started fiddling with a bunch of little vignettes. When I'm lost for writing, I will imagine a scene and stick some people in it, and sometimes those people resonate and then they become something else. So Clifford Ingram sprung up from originally I was working on the Lester Dent method of short story writing. So Lester Dent has this four-step process: create the hero, put him in trouble, give him more trouble, get him out of trouble. So it's a very simple thing, and he says 1,500 words for each one of these sections. I was like, well, that seems kind of ridiculous, but what the hell? So I said, what if I imagined myself a paranormal investigator whose job it is to hide the truth of the paranormal? He investigates it, just like most investigators, but unlike the regular investigators, his job is to go, oh my God, that's not a hoax. Let's erase that, hide that, obscure that, and tell those people they were crazy if they're not dead already, and discredit paranormal phenomena. And I didn't have a world beyond that moment. Just he was to investigate, find, refute, obscure, and make the world a safer place. And I didn't know how I was going to do any of the other stuff. But I made a vignette. I liked the vignette. So I made another vignette. I liked another vignette. So then I made a longer one and turned it into a short story and let my wife read it. And she says, this is your voice. She says, this character is your character. She says, this is the first time I've read anything that when I read it, it felt right. It felt like something you should be writing. So I wrote a few more short stories. I did a little bit of world building and explaining why this works and who he works for, what he does, why he does it. And then I wrote another short story, and then I gave it to her. And she says, oh, this is even better than the first one. So then I wrote another one, and she's like, okay, so when are you going to write a book? And I said, well, I don't have a book mentally yet, but I do have a long novella that I could put together. So Broken Glass was originally called The Man Who Wasn't There. And it was about a serial killer who could travel between mirrors. So as long as you had a mirror somewhere and he knew who you were, he could reach you and kill you. The more involved he was with you, the more likely it was that if he became enamored of you or emotionally connected to you, the more likely it was he was going to kill you. And this was before telephones, because this guy came out in the 20s and 30s. So we had telephones, but people were still learning how to get around. And so he was famous. He was handsome. People wanted to be with him, and they didn't know about his secret murder hobby. So eventually he comes to the awareness of the agency that Clifford works for back in the day. And they imprison him. And like most prisons, there's always an exit. And I'm not sure why they didn't kill him. I'm sure there was a reason. And one day Clifford may investigate why they didn't kill him at that time. But when the story revolves, he finds out there was a mall built on top of the place where the prison used to, where his mirror used to be that he was imprisoned in. When they broke the mirror, they assumed the prison would be gone and he would no longer exist. But the space he exists in is geosynchronous, meaning it's always on that spot. So they built a mall on top of that spot. And in the mall, what do we have lots of? Mirrors.
Sure.
So he starts moving between the mirrors in the mall and trying to get closer and closer. And eventually he gets to be able to reach out and kill someone. And he remembers how good it is, and he tries to escape. And that's what brings Clifford to this part of Louisiana, where he meets his current girlfriend and all of the other challenges of hunting down a guy who can leap between mirrors.
Wow.
So that was the first story. That was Broken Glass. And I've written a bunch of little vignettes and pieces and threads since then. Right now my focus is to get my kid out of high school. Okay, my kid is finally 5 days from graduating from high school. And I feel like I'm almost ready to try again. So I figure I'm going to pick Clifford up. I'm going to finish a story I'm working on, a series of a serial I started. And I've already got a good thread for that. So I just need to go ahead and push it to the end. And I have a couple of other threads that I've done. And people like the character and they like the world. And so I'm going to probably keep working on it until I can produce something I feel good about and then try and sell it again.
That sounds, I don't know a lot about that. I will say I write in a similar genre, have a character with some similar aspects. We're not in some ways, we have our own voice. We do our own thing, but the paranormal detective is not groundbreaking in of itself. So I don't feel any which way about that, but I will say that sounds really intriguing and I need to check that out. So
it was fun. It was meant to be an homage to like Doc Savage, Man of Bronze.
I picked up on that. Absolutely.
That kind of era. So, it is meant to be kind of tongue in cheek, kind of emotionally cathartic, psychologically challenging. And yet for the most part, I just wanted to be able to say I wrote it. I felt good about it. I enjoyed it. And I always enjoy whenever I write a Clifford Ingram, whatever, I always enjoy the feeling I get at the end of it. It feels good and solid and complete. And I feel like every time it's like I'm meeting him and I feel like I know him better each time I meet him, and I enjoy him more, even though he becomes more complicated as a character, because he is a complicated character. And I enjoy that part of him too. I have so many others. I have more characters than I have time.
Well, before I pass you back to John, I know he's anxious to get something out there, but I just want to say, I'm also writing with some family challenges. I have a family member with an illness, and I've got young adult children, and hats off to your brother. I feel you. It can be tough to focus, and that's one of the challenges that we have to face, where you try to work your way through it. And I totally get it. And and you know, these things eventually work themselves out. So hang in there, and I'm sure that you'll find what works best for you. So I'll be thinking about you regarding those things, and I hope things turn out for the best.
So far, so good, brother. So far, so good.
All right, John.
Well, I had a follow-up, but you actually answered my follow-up question. So what I will do before I ask the next question is to refer back to how I feel like you guys are fortunate in having the people who inspired you along the way still with you. I had two high school teachers who inspired me with my writing. Unfortunately, they were elderly 32 years ago, so they are no longer with us, and they did not live long enough to see my first book published because, you know, they were elderly at that time, and unfortunately, they did not live to see that, so I could not share that with them. But I did have someone from college, and the story is very similar to yours. Jim Powell was the creator of the Indiana Writers Center, and not only was he a college instructor for me, but he was a friend and a mentor, and he could not stand genre fiction to save his life. He was one of those people who was such a literary writer. He was like, this science fiction stuff, whatever, you know. But he saw that I had potential with my storytelling. So he wanted to cultivate that. And he and another instructor, I never got A's in their classes, just like you, because I was writing what I wanted to write, and it wasn't what was fitting into what they were wanting me to write, but they couldn't justify giving me any lower than a B because they thought that I was a good storyteller. So it was one of those situations where, you know, I'm like, I'll accept the B because that's who I am. And, you know, thank you for the knowledge that you've imparted and the inspiration to keep my stories, no matter how fantastical they are, to be grounded in the human condition and being relatable to the audience. And it served me very well as an author. And those were invaluable lessons and a lot of redlining that they did. So I can relate to that scenario with you guys in that aspect. I wish my high school teachers were still around to see the level of success that I've had with being a published author. But I know I'm not necessarily a religious person, but I'm a spiritual person. I believe their spirits are happy. And so that being said, you talked about Clifford Ingram, but can you tell our audience more about Haywards Reach?
Haywards Reach was, okay. All right. So again, it's always a saga.
It's okay. We got time.
It's always a saga. So when I started writing, about 2009, I started trying to find my way. I found my way to something called the Black Science Fiction Society. As a writer, I was hoping to find other writers. So I found my way to the Black Science Fiction Society, which the writer, the creator of, has just won one of the Nebula Sheffield Awards. Jarvis Shepherd.
Yep.
So he's won that award. But when I met Jarvis, he was just starting the Black Science Fiction Society. I mean, just starting. And so we got in there and, you know, we wrote stories. Like if you go there, you can still find stories I've written from back then. And so sometime around 2010, I started writing. There was a contest called 30 Stories in 30 Days. So could you write 30 short stories in 30 days? And the answer generally when I posed it to the people in the Black Science Fiction Society is like, are you crazy? No one's going to be able to write 30 short stories in 30 days. And I was like, well, call me no one. So I took the challenge. So I sat down and I said, for 30 days, I'm going to write a new short story every day. It will never be related to the previous short stories. And it will never be anything that's part of what I consider the low-hanging fruit of fiction. So that means there'll be no zombies. There will be no werewolves, no vampires. I couldn't say no alien invasions because I love alien invasions so much. So I couldn't say that, but no werewolves, no vampires, no classic monsters, no easy stories. Everything would be challenging. And so with that said, I started writing a short story every day. And it was hard. And I was good until day 15. And on day 15, I almost gave up. I sat here on day 15. I said, I don't have anything to do. I have nothing. I have nothing. I'm empty. Who knew that it would run out so quickly? And then I said, okay, maybe I'm panicking. Maybe there's just a deeper, more meaningful story to be had. So then I wrote a story called Suicide Seed. And Suicide Seed is a story where humanity is no longer reproducing. They didn't know when it started happening. They just started noticing we weren't reproducing. And we were also noticing that plants that use the same kind of reproductive process, male, female, gametes, male-gene to get, also weren't happening. So suddenly our food was going away. So humans were going away, food was going away, and we couldn't tell what was going on, and no one knew what to do. And so basically one of the things that one of the scientists discovers is that, well, since mushrooms don't do that, they don't do that kind of thing, we'll always have mushrooms. So he basically, convinces people that whatever's happening to us will happen slower and slower, and eventually people will go back to reproducing. But in the meantime, we're going to eat mushrooms. So we don't have to, humanity isn't doomed. We're just going to be on the ropes. But the government tries to silence him, and eventually only his assistant survives to share the secret of his success. And after that, I said, well, damn, I just went completely off the rails there. Fuck it, I'll do what I want now. So I just, after that, I didn't have any more trouble. I wrote 16 more stories, and at the end of the month, I was like, wow, well, this was fun. I enjoyed this immensely, and why not make a book out of it? And so I took 4 stories off the table. They were super short stories, so they didn't really count. They met the requirement, but they weren't my favorites. And so it's like 4 of you will fall by the wayside. You're gone. So I took the remainder, I wrote them, edited them, made them pretty, gave them meat, and then I submitted them to Jan, and Jan read them and said, this is awesome, you should publish this. And that's where Haywards Reach came from. It came from a contest that was originally called 30 Stories in 30 Days. It's not possible, said everyone, and I never cared, and I did it anyway, and I enjoyed it, because I think it was very liberating. It was liberating to imagine for a moment that I might have been channeling Ray Bradbury, who had to write a short story 4 times a month, every month, because that's where his food came from. And I was like, yeah, okay, I could do that. So if he could do it 4 times a month, I could do it 4 times a week. And then I could do it more than that. And so then after that, I became more willing to take that risk. And it became really a lot of fun. And I still have anxiety about it, but less than I did back then. I mean, it's been many years since then, and I feel more liberated. And so if I sit down to write something I really care about, I like it. It tends to be good, and it tends to get a good response. So yeah, that's where Haywards Reach came from. It came from a contest, and then a collection of people telling me it wasn't possible, and never tell me the odds. Never. Just don't do it. And so I did it, and I enjoyed it, and I will probably do it again real soon. Matter of fact, I did. In fact, I did. I wrote several of those contests since then. I didn't turn them into books, but there've been. We actually have a contest on my site, on my Facebook group called "Damn It, I'm a Science Fiction Writer," and we had a section called 30 Stories in 30 Days, where we annually get together and we try to write 30 stories. Now, we're rarely successful, but we enjoy the work, and we enjoy the challenge, and we enjoy sharing stories. And so I have done it many times since then, and will probably. I was thinking about doing it again this year after my kid got out of school, so I could focus on it. And, there'd be days where I don't need to do anything for him now. He'll be able to, him and my wife can do gardening stuff or whatever they want to do. And I'll sit down and write because I don't have to monitor his homework and his schoolwork and all that. So I'm hoping it will give me a little more room to get that done. So it's been a contest thing that I've done for years, and it, basically, it's one of the ways I inspire myself to keep writing when I feel like I can't anymore, because when you start doing that, it just changes how you think about stories. That and tvtropes.org, those 2 tools right there, magnifique.
Yeah, right. I hear you.
So just to follow up on that, because you answered my question, but I have a follow-up question based upon the answer that you gave me with Haywards Reach. Basically, well, let me start by saying it's something that I want to read, definitely. But also, the stories in that collection. So I noticed you had mentioned, you were going to avoid some of the tropes or low-hanging fruit when you were doing the 30-day challenge. So the stories in the collection, are they various genre? Are there any literary stories? I know you're a big sci-fi guy, but
Baby, can you pass me Haywards Reach? It's on this little bookshelf right over here by the bedroom door. I can tell you exactly what they are because there's a copy right over there, strangely enough.
Is it funny how that happens?
Right there in that book. No. Yeah, look on the side. You'll see it. Oh. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to the store.
Yes, baby. So, here is Haywards Reach. The cover is a painting called Harvest of Gold by an artist in Saudi Arabia. I found it online. I thought it was a beautiful painting. I had to have it. So I called the guy, I wrote him a letter saying, hey man, are you doing anything with this? He's like, no. I said, I love this. May I buy it from you? He's like, sure. So I did. And I made it my first book cover. I still love this painting. It is a magnificent painting. In these stories, there are 4 sections. Part 1, Fables of Old Earth. Part 2, A Time of Troubles. Part 3, Entering the Penumbra. Part 4, The Diaspora of Earth. None of these stories were written to be related in any way, but they thematically shared perspectives. So they end up being woven, not in the order I wrote them in, they're in the order I felt like they belonged in.
I gotcha.
So some of them are literature, like The Lions of Mexico is a piece of literature. It's based off of a story of a Mexican auto mechanic who had people breaking into his construction yard. And so what he does is he cuts his dog's hair in the shape of a lion and only lets it out in the dead of night. So and then he passed this idea around that he had a lion, and the myth of the lion plus the lion-shaped shadow prowling his yard at night kept people from stealing from him anymore. And it was a real story, and I loved it. And so I said, what would that conversation have sounded like? So I wrote The Lions of Mexico as a tribute to his ingenuity and what he might have felt like he was doing at the time. And it's one of my favorites. So, but it has no supernatural elements. It's just a literature story. What else do we have? We have sci-fi. We've got Übermensch, which is basically a story about a Nazi lab where they had a super soldier being developed. But the plane crashes where they were trying to deliver it to the front, and the heroes or the allies find it, but they find not just the super soldier, they also find a series of super weapons that would eat everything around them and get bigger and stronger and faster and more terrifying. And so the super soldier, in an effort to stay alive, joins the allies to help them fight the monsters. And at the end, the allies let her go because they really couldn't stop her. But more importantly, she really wasn't interested in being a Nazi. so she's like, I'm out. And I have another story later where she and not in this book, but another story where she lives after the war and she hunts down the captain, the sergeant who was the captain of the group that she was in, and they end up marrying because she felt she had a strong relationship to him and she just couldn't put him out of her mind. So she decided she was going to fix that problem. And she was that kind of woman. So she went and fixed that problem. I make fun of everything. So I did end up with a zombie story called Cheaper Labor. Cheaper Labor ends up being a story about a company that hires their workers, but over time zombifies them so they pay them less and less and less. So eventually they're working for free and they don't realize they've been zombified. So
nice.
So again, yeah, it's talking about our world, but
very nice. Very nice.
Paper is a future story about a world where the written paper, anything written on paper is gone. There are no trees anymore. So paper becomes this commodity that people are hunting down, finding, and recycling. And it becomes a treasure. You start hunting for treasure troves of paper. But in this story, two young men who are very good at finding paper suddenly find a treasure trove of paper they don't want to sell. But the person they normally sell paper to is not trying to hear that. So they now have to decide if the paper itself is more valuable. What's on the paper is more valuable than the paper itself, and it is. And so they end up having discrepancies over that. I make fun of everything. So I have science fiction, I have fantasy, I have horror. I have a lot of sci-fi because I have a heart for sci-fi. Pax Iridium is one of my favorite stories about a scientist who learns that his genetic engineering project on another planet has been taken over by the government. And instead of breeding useful crossbreeds that can be used to help humanity, they're breeding crossbreeds to turn into weapon systems on other worlds. And when he finds this out, he is pissed. And the government, of course, comes to silence him. And they come to find out that he has not just been experimenting on the animals, he's been experimenting on himself. And thus their efforts to silence him don't go the way they hoped. They just don't. Things happen. So, but it's one of my favorite stories because it's one of those where people assume that if you're a pacifist, that you're weak. And I say, I'd never make that assumption because a man that might be a pacifist might have at one time been something else. Pacifist today, but he wasn't always a pacifist. So you might want to remember that. And so that's that story. So it's a host of stories. I mean, I had a good time. It's really one of my favorite pieces of work. I had a good time writing it, and the more I read it, the more about it I enjoy. For example, I gave the ferryman Charon. I have a story called A Cappuccino for Charon, and Charon decides he's going to outsource the riverboat process because, let's face it, I'm old, I'm tired, and there's more of you dying than I'll ever be able to take to hell. So he wants to franchise it. And one of the people he wants to franchise to is this young man who's about to have a stroke. And the young man's like, what do you mean I'm about to have a stroke? Dude, really? I can look at you. You're going to die in a few minutes, in fact. So I'm offering you the deal of a lifetime. Very short window of opportunity. You might want to take advantage of it. And so in exchange for working for him, he would not have to die. He could become frozen in time, and he could continue to franchise and get other ferrymen so that people, because he shows him a scene of the afterworld, and he says, there's the boat. That's the boat I got to put people on. Now, see that line out there? Those are all the people waiting for someplace to be. I can't do this all, So he's offering to franchise it, and their whole conversation takes place in a coffee shop. And it opens with Charon offering to pay for his coffee in pennies. Technically, that's what he gets paid in. So right. When he puts $5 worth of pennies on the counter, everybody looks at him like he's crazy. And so the guy who he's going to talk to offers to pay his lunch debt, his coffee debt. And that's when they have the conversation about franchising the afterlife. So they're all weird stories, but I love them. And the people who do read them and write reviews do like them. So it's a humble beginning, but one day maybe people will look back and say this was actually really good stuff, and you really should give it the opportunity to read it. I enjoyed them all.
I'm just gonna say I gotta check it out now. It's my short story collection is called Darkness with a Chance of Whimsy, and it sounds like you and I think along similar lines of take something kind of out there, but approach it with deadly seriousness, even if it doesn't seem like something you can necessarily treat that way, and then play it through to the end. And those things you've talked about just sound so interesting to me. So I definitely got to add this to my list and check it out.
Yeah, I will definitely be adding it too. It's very intriguing, just from what you've described. And the reason what prompted me to ask you that question is because I have a short story collection, and some of the characters that I created for that short story collection have appeared in novels, but a lot of them were created when I was in college. So, they started with those short story assignments, again, writing what I wanted to write. And they blossomed into characters that are featured in short stories, novellas, and novels later on. But I wrote my short story collection from the perspective of various genres because I wanted to challenge myself to write outside of speculative fiction. Speculative fiction is my bread and butter. It's what I love, that and mystery. So there's like a thin line between, I think mystery is the gap between literary fiction and speculative fiction because it can go either way. Right. But, I'd never written literary fiction because I found it boring. I mean, not that I hadn't read literary fiction that I liked. I have. But I found it boring as a writer. So I challenged myself to write these stories. And much to my chagrin, I was actually impressed with myself that I was able to do this. And so hearing you talk about the various stories in your collection has inspired me to do a little bit more. I had thought about, volume 2 of my short story collection, what it would be like. But hearing a kindred soul speak about their short story collection as you have is really inspiring. So thank you, Thaddeus. You've inspired me today.
It's my pleasure. Like I said, these stories still inspire me. Every blue moon, I'll go back and pick up a thread. That's one day when I'm famous and I've written lots of books, and I hope to be able to tell people that, you know what, you can go back and you can read these stories. And if you follow them, you'll follow that some of these stories have become some of those stories.
Mm-hmm.
Tales of the Twilight Continuum. That's a book I actually finished. I just haven't had anybody do anything with it. Started here. So it started here, and I ended up picking the story up and running with it. So the story was called Haywards Reach. And it was about the idea that the Earth was under assault by an unknown enemy, but the enemy wasn't off planet; it was already on planet. And what had happened was that previously an alien artifact landed on Earth, crashed on Earth, and was buried in the core of the Earth. And it has been trying for millions of years to rise to the surface, and it finally does. And as it rises to the surface, it draws attention to itself. The thing that it is was something that was trying to be destroyed by a second group that had deemed it gone because it hadn't been seen. It wasn't found anymore. So they deemed it dead and not to worry about it. And so when the Galactic Empire gets that beacon, they're like, uh-oh. So they come to Earth and find out this thing is happening and basically realize the Earth is doomed. So they go to the Earth's government and says, hey, you get as many people, things as you can get together in the next X number of days, and we're going to take them off planet. And your planet will no longer be your own. And anybody who doesn't want to leave, good luck. Of course, lots of people choose to leave. But a whole bunch of people say, this is my planet. I'm not giving it up. So the story is based around them, a scene where they fight to hold on to their tiny piece of Earth as many people escape. But when I pick up that story, from the perspective of the aliens having rescued humanity and having humanity in space, a species without a planet. They are immigrants. They are lonely. They are sad. And they find that they want to go back to Earth, but the reports they get on Earth are not favorable. Earth hasn't been destroyed, but you don't want to live there anymore. And so now humanity is a homeless species trying to make it in a huge galactic empire. And they're trying to find a fit. And, we don't have any technology. We don't have anything anybody wants. So what are we going to do for a living? And that, of course, is the question for humanity in a bigger, more awesome universe. And then, of course, the question of what that thing is, why it exists, and who's going to solve it is a different problem, because that triggers a series of other problems that now humanity is blamed for, but didn't do. So, wow. So it's a struggle for everybody to find their fit, and some people do well, some don't do so well. Pan-humanity, creatures that have come from Earth, which have been uplifted now, are trying to find other humans, and humans aren't like, you're from Earth, but you're a chimpanzee, and I'm probably not going to be your friend. So there's still speciation. Humans suck, and so despite the fact that we have this ability to now have all these different kinds of humanity, doesn't necessarily mean that we really get along very well still. And so that's Tales of the Twilight Continuum. That's book 1, and so I've been working on that, and one day I'll get back to it. And there's so much I want to write. I have to find the time and the emotional clarity to do so. I feel like for me, that emotional clarity has escaped me, but I am determined to get back to it no matter what.
I feel you. I do. And I wish you the best of luck in finding that, and maybe we'll chat a bit, and maybe we can find it together at some point. I'm kind of going through the same thing, so I'm definitely in touch. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about things outside of genre. We don't want to spend too much time on this because we're running kind of long already, but I want to give you the chance to discuss some things. So can you tell our listeners about the Good Men's Project magazine? In your biography, you say a men's magazine challenging social norms for men in modern society. So you've been editing that for a number of years, and obviously it has a clear mission statement. Can you discuss that in further detail?
The Good Men Project is a publication designed to help men cope with the changing world. Our world is different. Many men are still using an archetype from 1950. Strong, silent, suffer in silence,
Yep.
do the quiet thing. You're the breadwinner, you lead your family can't disagree with you. It's all about you. You're the boss. You're the man. The man does what needs to be done. And that's so stifling and so choking and so heartbreaking, because so many men, when confronted by the modern world, let's say you lose your job due to your company outsourcing your job overseas. You had no control over that. You had no say over that. You had nothing to do with that. But now you're unemployed. And not just unemployed, but your whole community is unemployed because whatever they were doing that they outsourced put your entire community on the street. Men have self-destructed from this. Men have committed suicide. Men have killed their families. Men have wandered away from their homes. Men have gone into insane asylums. Men have melted down because the world that they knew from 1950 is gone. The expectations from 1950 are gone. And men are trying to find a new way to live, new way to think, new way to be. And they're forced to deal with emotions that they previously just swallowed and died horribly at 60 because I've choked down my emotional suffering until I'm dead. And so younger men are like, I'm not feeling that. I don't want that. I want something other than that. So what is there? So the Good Men Project, the goal of that is to tell men you have choices. You do not have to suffer in silence. You do not have to choke back your anger, your hate, your frustrations, or your feelings, if you're gay or straight, whatever that is, whatever it is that you have hidden from the world because you are a man, you don't have to do that anymore. There's places for that. There are people you can talk to. There are groups you can interact with. There are conversations you can have. There's a bunch of men out there, not just 2 or 3, but tens of thousands who are asking the same questions and looking for the same answers. And that's what the Good Men Project does. It gives people the opportunity to say, I'd like to be different than my father, and know what that means. And sometimes you don't know what that means. And so you have to find those few pioneers who opted to be different in a time when being different was bad, and that they've managed to survive that. And here's the wisdom they have to impart. So
where can people find out more about that?
thegoodmenproject.com, I believe. I think it's still .com. Let me do a quick check and I can tell you for certain.
All righty.
I
would imagine Google will bring it up.
Yep, it's still .com.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool.
Goodmanproject.com. You can see that. I've been a writer and an editor, and primarily now a podcaster. Primarily, I'm the climate activist. When I started writing for the Good Men Project, I was already a good man. Therefore, I didn't need a lot. But I was interested in ideas about things that good men should be doing. What should good men be doing? So one of the things I talked about was the environment. But let's face it, back then, nobody was really caring about the environment. That's 10 years ago.
The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by OG Nerds, a new social media community dedicated to nerds of a certain age, 40 and over, although all are welcome. Members are encouraged to share articles and links on their favorite nerdy topics such as animation, anime, art, books, writing, comics, manga, movies, music, sports, tech, science, TV, video games, RPGs, and more. Be sure to visit them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by Showtime Cinema in Mooresville, Indiana. Their friendly staff is always willing to go the extra mile to make your movie-going experience an enjoyable and memorable one. Enjoy the comfort of their new cushioned seating in their spacious auditoriums, and while you're there, be sure to stop by the concession stand and purchase some popcorn where real butter topping is an option. They're located at 300 South Bridge Street in Mooresville, Indiana. We hope to see you at the movies.